There is no killer app. There's nothing the equivalent of PageMaker on the Macintosh in nanotech. Nothing's emerging at that. I call them assassin apps. These are all evolutionary. They are not something brand new, intrinsic to nano, unique to nano, incorporating only nano parts and only possible through the, quote, miracle of nano. The use that we're finding for nanotech these days is in, as I said, evolutionary products, not revolutionary products. Now, our process is a very simple one. Basically, we take a reaction gas and a fuel, and the fuel contains a catalyst, and the catalyst in our case is iron. We chose iron not because we're fans of iron, but because it's not nickel, it's not cobalt, it's not these metals that have potential health issues. The fuel is grain alcohol. Again, a biosource fuel that we particularly like because it's renewable. The reaction gas here is hydrogen, and we generate the hydrogen electrochemically through a clean source on site. All of this stuff is done very nicely, very cleanly, with the most benign components that we can think of. What type of things do we have to worry about in this type of environment? And to tell you the truth, many of them are very basic. Worker exposure during manufacturing, processing, routine handling and transfer, storage and shipping. These are things that are typically done in the chemical industry anyway. They're not particularly unique to nano. They're just standard issues. We also have to worry about releases to the environment, releases during manufacturing, processing, also scrap and waste disposal. The material itself is unique because what we've got is so-called the emergent properties at the nanoscale, which is the point of a lot of debate whether these things are actually different. Catalysts are very important because, again, you've got iron, you've got cobalt, you've got nickel, and these things are potentially dangerous, specifically the nickel and the cobalt. One thing that's often overlooked are feedstocks, byproducts, and impurities. One thing that a lot of people will use is carbon monoxide as a feedstock. Carbon monoxide, of course, is very dangerous if you don't have the plant set up properly. Just the fact that you're using something like this can pose a safety problem. Byproducts, impurities, the aspect ratios and lengths. Of course, our stuff has an aspect ratio about 1,000 times longer than a standard nanotube, but it's something that one working with nanotubes has to worry about in their plant. I go off, and I've had a lot of experience in the chemical industry and working in EHS, and you can only control what you can measure or detect, and this is something that I cannot stress enough. An unknown material must be treated with the utmost respect and caution, and this is very important. Apply the golden rule in how you instruct your employees, vendors, and customers in the handling and processing of your material. Anticipate where, when, and how release exposure could occur. Track material during production and use. Quantify with data. Leverage existing procedures and tests. Collaborate and share whenever possible, and trust me, I do that because I'm cheap. Act quickly and in good faith. Be cautious but reasonable, and to borrow a page from the EPA manual, low REX, low release. If we're going to take a look at nanotubes right now, if we're, May 2010, what are we going to know about nanotubes? What are we going to know about how we can detect them in the work environment? And what should we do? We have to be concerned with particle count, particle size, particle sources, particle composition, and I'll get into that in a moment, morphology. Whether we're dealing with nanotubes, free nanotubes, aggregates of nanotubes, or soot or amorphous carbon. So I will say this in summary: build a corporate culture that's open, transparent, actions count a lot, find where you have gaps, acceptable levels are possible, available exposures and protective equipment do work, adopt it.
The purpose of the talk that I'm going to go into here is essentially I'm a member of the International Commission on Occupational Health. I was asked by Dr. Eggleston to look into these aspects of human health and nanomaterials. I inquired with the Committee of Epidemiology in the International Commission, as well as the American College of Occupational Environmental Medicine. Is there any human health data on nanomaterials? Well, there really wasn't any, which I don't think is too surprising to people. So what I did is I decided to pick a very ancient occupational environmental illness and tie it to a lot of the discussions we've been having. I chose a substance that since antiquity has been known to cause disease. The two morphs of silicon dioxide that are passing around, one is sand, the other one is glass. And it's interesting, on this side we have a substance that causes severe illness. It's actually been shown for centuries to cause illness. On this side, the things that we've been drinking out of, our glasses, there are no illnesses really linked to it. And yet, I've realized that later there's actually an interesting physical question of whether this is really a liquid or a solid, whether the glass is like that. I find that that's interesting because this, I think, will underlie some of the questions as we go forward into this question about nanomaterials and other small hazards. How many in here have heard of acute silicosis? Okay, that's fairly good. About half the room, a little more than half. It's a very rare condition, extremely fatal, and very recent. Most recent cases I've seen, actually interacted with my professor in West Texas, 2005. It is an alveolar proteinosis. That essentially means that the lung secretes a proteinaceous fluid, but it doesn't cause fibrosis, and that's significant. But here's the clicker. We do not know why this occurs. My first point, because there's a philosophical question about materials of small size. I want to convince everybody in here that it is possible when you change the size and surface chemistry of a structure that it can lead to toxicity. Do I think that other materials will go down there? I'm a physician. I have no idea. I consider this highly relevant to this whole question of how do we regulate nanomaterials? How do we come into play with this? How should we do with that? This is my second point. We can study these things for essentially centuries and still not come up with the question at hand. When I interact with my colleagues in the legal world, I'm often reminded by a discussion that's made, not making a decision is a decision. And when we think about the aspects of what we're doing, whether it's engineering the sheets of nanotubes or putting catalysts or other materials, please realize that at some point everything will become a natural experiment. We will put these things into where the environment is going to reveal the true test. Other humans are going to reveal the true test, whether it's the workers, the users, and that's a very interesting aspect to think about. And yet, when you spend all this time, you may never find the answer. Non-biomedical variables highly affect the outcome. If the risk that a person is exposed to is involuntary, is not familiar, is man-made, has catastrophic potential, that creates a situation where it's like a boiler situation where you cannot get around it very easily. Essentially, the person, whether it's the worker, it's usually a worker because they're the guinea pigs with many of these things. They are put in an involuntary sense, exposed with different materials. They are in it because they want to earn a living, and so there's another pressure on there. You put all those into situations like this, and then you throw in the social pressures, such as the husband or wife needs to feed for the child, etc. These can overwhelm the actual toxicity. The word actual is improper. The toxicity that is perceived or believed to be there from the scientific literature may be much worse because of these factors. That's the third point that I want to stress. In my conclusion, there are these 3 points, and I want to leave it to these 3 points. The structure and size changes can affect the toxicity. There are facets of the illness, whether it's causation or mechanism, that will be studied for centuries, and we may never know what it is. We really have to know something, so we are usually drug into a wall and we make decisions. Now, if you have mechanisms to address these, we will gladly love you to death. And I go through all the different literature that I can to try to not be pushed into a wall where I have to tell people it's not known. But I'm surprised at how often I have to be pushed into that situation. Third is to realize that we live in a culture and an environment that that's around us, that's not just us alone. We live around other people, our families, and all these forces interact and can raise and lower the risk of illness and disease in ways that are often very hidden, but they are very real.
Why the workplace? Why do we concern ourselves with the workplace? Where do you get exposed to anything first? And for me, the workplace starts with the synthesis of the first molecule down to the development of it in proof of concept and scale up in full-scale production. We're looking at the workplace as nice little kitschy term back from my corporate days. We look at it from the molecule out to the market and then some, out to the final fate of that material in its reuse, recycle, and disposal. That's where the action happens first. And I like to say that the workers are really at the point, regardless of the intended use of the product. Whether you intend your product to be used for A or B, whether it's a drug or a device, whether it's a cleaning product, whether it's a new plastic, there's a worker somewhere involved in handling it and handling the pure form of it, the neat form of that material. So if you had to organize all the work that you wanted to do, one of the ways to do it is you could follow a pretty basic risk management paradigm of looking at the hazard exposures, assessing exposures, trying to characterize your risk based on that, and then put together some good risk management programs. And that is, in fact, how the NIOSH research program is organized. We're doing a lot of this work. In fact, all of this work in a very concurrent basis. My fun job at NIOSH, among many others, is coordinator of a portfolio of projects that make up our Nanotechnology Research Center or program. And we have activity across all of these areas in looking at implications and applications of engineered nanomaterials in our EHS research. Our program is quite active. It covers all the things you would expect in a regular risk management approach or the risk assessment, risk management paradigm. We as occupational safety and health people have a long history of working in the gray zone or having to deal with soft law or trying to go forward when there isn't that definitive quantitative guidance. So working with engineered nanomaterials and all the questions isn't new to some of us. There are a lot of solutions that do exist and can be reapplied. We know our way around ultrafine particulate at NIOSH. We're reapplying a lot of that to engineered nanomaterials. Collaboration is actually working. This is the first time ever that everybody is at the table up front of a material or a technology, for the most part, being released out into the marketplace, asking the same questions, looking for the same answers, and collaborating with each other. So I'm very encouraged about the future of the nanomaterials market because we're all at the table, labor, industry, government, academia, asking a lot of the same questions, looking for answers to those same questions. What this reapplication of what we already know allows is it allows us to focus on any of those situations that might truly be unique or different about engineered nanomaterials. So instead of putting all of your energy and resources into the broad spectrum of all the questions, focus on those that are unique and different because we know answers to a lot of the others. Creative approaches are being explored. Some of you may be familiar with this qualitative risk management approach called control banding. NIOSH is exploring its utility as another tool to manage your engineered nanomaterials. So my key message is we know how to do a lot of this already. What we need to do is convince ourselves with that, build our comfort level, and get good expert guidance where it's needed. The quick summary is we've got a lot of products who claim to be nano-enabled already on the market. Many of these are nano-silver or nano-titanium dioxide-based products. This doesn't mean that there are thousands of engineered nanomaterials on the market. It does mean, though, that there are thousands being evaluated to move on to the market. We know that there are certain hazards associated with these materials. There's an awful lot of research going on, but on the flip side of that, there's an awful lot of guidance that's being developed. And so NIOSH is very aggressive and active in all of these areas. And so it makes for a nice picture that we're up front of the technology, we're looking at all the hazard data, but we're also developing some good guidance. And one of the activities I've already mentioned is the development of our current intelligence bulletin on carbon nanotubes. But we're also looking at what's the feasibility and utility of developing some type of an epidemiologic framework for tracking workers as we go forward.